Disclaimer, not disclaimer. This teaching is not intended to replace studying the Torah on Shabbat. Rather, it is an extension of Torah study to learn from the sins of our forebears in the ancient past so we will understand the Torah's practical application in our own lives today. We will also regain our national identity, which is so greatly missing among us. Our true identity is not the nation of our biological birth, but with biblical Israel. And the patriotism for biblical Israel, which we so badly need, can be gained by identifying with the people and history of those ancient times. Always study the Torah of Yahweh, which is His instructions, teachings, and His law, rolled into one word, Torah. Not only on Shabbat, but every day we should meditate on His Torah, His law. Psalms 119, 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. Deuteronomy 5:33. You shall walk in all the ways which Yahweh your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. Psalms 1:1 and 1:2. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand on the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in Yahweh's law, His Torah. On His law, His Torah, he meditates day and night. Psalms 119, 174. I have longed for your salvation, Yahweh. Your law, your Torah, is my delight. Father, I thank you for this message, and I thank you for the understanding that you have given, and I pray that it would only be your words and your understanding. Father, I have always sought to know what you said and what you meant when you said it. I don't want to know what people think, what they say, and what they teach. I want to know what you said. And so, Father, I pray that if there is anything in here that is incorrect, that is of me, I pray that it will die, and that only what you have said and what you meant will come forth and flourish in Yeshua's name. Amen. Okay, this is called the Final Prophecies of Jephthah, and believe it or not, this is our 33rd, this is number 33 teaching. It's been interesting, these teachings going from the book of Joshua now through about 2/3 of the way through the book of Judges. And we've been studying Jephthah. We studied Jephthah last week, actually the week before. And now we're going to have the final prophecies of Jephthah, because Jephthah's life is very prophetic of Yeshua Messiah. And we're going to find that, like what happened to Yeshua Messiah with the Jews, with Jephthah, it's the Ephraimites who turn on him. He saved Israel from the Ammonites, and the Ephraimites now turn on Jephthah. The Ephraimites have turned out to be a wicked tribe, and one that Yahweh will now later remove from authority. You know, if we keep doing these history lessons, we're going to find that Yahweh removes Ephraim from authority. Ephraim's confrontation with Jephthah, thus, then, has many lessons for us to learn, even for us today, because we live out in the world with, all the tribes. The Ephraimites are out in the world with us, and of course, the tribes of Judah are out there in the world with us, and, all the tribes have problems, but you'll see that the Ephraimites are shamed. Judges 12:1. The men of Ephraim were gathered together and passed northward. And they said to Jephthah, Why did you pass over to fight against the children of Ammon and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house around you with fire." And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you did not save me out of their hand." So look what's happened here. The Ephraimites have gotten themselves a group of elders together, and now they have traveled northward to Mizpah, to where Jephthah actually lives now. He's the new judge, and they traveled in order to get to him, to threaten him. Now, when we read the account of Jephthah's battle with Ammon, we did not see that he called to Ephraim, but here we see that Jephthah did ask for their help. And we know that Jephthah is telling the truth here. He's not making this up. Otherwise, his reply would not have satisfied the Ephraimites. In other words, they would have protested this statement in front of anyone else, Jephthah's family or any other Gileadites who might have been present, if what Jephthah said was not true. Therefore, we know Jephthah did call for their help, and he further answers them, "When I saw that you did not save me, I put my life in my hand and passed over against the children of Ammon, and Yahweh delivered them into my hand." Now, he's saying here the same thing that Gideon said when they rebuked Gideon. Gideon was handed the Midianites. Jephthah was handed the Ammonites. "Why then have you come up to me today to fight against me?" Now, that's a good question. And he says, "When I saw that you didn't save me," that phrase there is a reference to the duty that Ephraim had as the lead tribe to answer Jephthah's call for help. And he said he took his own life in his own hand when they did not answer his call. But Yahweh handed the Ammonites over to him in spite of the failure of the Ephraimites to join in the battle. Now, the inference here is that Yahweh would have handed the Ammonites to the Ephraimites if they had gone into battle. Jephthah makes the righteous declaration that the battle against Ammon was won by Yahweh. It wasn't him. He's not claiming glory for this. And I showed last week that one of Jephthah's righteous characteristics is that he always pointed to Yahweh as Yeshua did. The Ephraimites had criticized Gideon during his pursuit of the kings of Midian, but now it's not just a criticism. Now they have escalated their rhetoric to an actual threat against a man's life, and not only his life, they have threatened his personal home with, his wife and maybe his daughter in there and any servants he might have. Who doesn't know that a man's home is a sacred place? Apparently the Ephraimites don't know that. For the second time, they have become angry in a fit of jealousy with a man from the tribe of Manasseh for doing what they had not and or were not willing to do. Gideon was from Manasseh. Now Jephthah, he's from Manasseh. And there's this jealousy from Ephraim over Manasseh now. The next verse tells us how they answered him with the insult, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the middle of Ephraim and in the middle of Manasseh," when he gathered against them to battle, to fight for and defend his own home against them. It says that there in verse 4. Then Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. The men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they, the Ephraimites, said, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the middle of Ephraim and in the middle of Manasseh." So apparently Jephthah had with him some fugitives, some men that, the Ephraimites really didn't want them. And so, they had gone up to Tob to be with Jephthah when he was in Tob, and they gathered also with those from Manasseh that, the Manassites didn't really want them either. These were people who were just outcasts of Ephraim and Manasseh. And apparently, and I know this is not in the script, but apparently some of those from Ephraim had gone to be with Jephthah. And so they're just jealous about this whole thing. They just can't hardly stand it. They just want to burn his house around him. And Jephthah had asked them, "Why have you come to fight against me, since it was Yahweh who put the Ammonites in my hand?" So Samuel recorded their answer in verse 4, saying, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the middle of Ephraim and in the middle of Manasseh." And Samuel has a reason for doing that, to show what kind of men the elders and the tribe of Ephraim had become. So they're accusing him of being fugitives, which was a reference to Jephthah's once fugitive status, which has now been reversed, but they're not going to acknowledge him as the national judge of Israel. They're just not going to do it. They're going to kill him because they didn't get the glory. The Ephraimites came to Jephthah because he and the Gileadites of Manasseh and Ephraim, who fought with him, shamed them. And they deserved to be shamed. They were trying to get the glory for the victory after the fact, after the battle. And the only way to do that was to try to shame Jephthah and justify killing him to do it. So this was all about them losing face and losing their authority along with losing their face. Furthermore, the Ephraimites were not only insulting Jephthah, but they were also accusing him and the tribe of Manasseh of treason against them. They have to make this accusation stick, that it has to be treason for Jephthah and the Gileadites from Manasseh and those who were with Jephthah at Tob, who had gone down to Mizpah with him, that they had committed treason against them. Otherwise, it's not going to be enough just that they, lose face. There has to be an actual sin against them, and that's the false accusation. It didn't matter to the Ephraimites that Yahweh had given the Ammonites into Jephthah's hand. The Ephraimites should have been praising Yahweh. They should have gone to his house and praised Yahweh and said, "Thank you for putting your life in your hand and going to take care of that Ammonite problem." But instead, they were insulting and accusing Jephthah of treason. So Jephthah had no choice but to go to battle against another tribe of Israel, because the Ephraimites were determined to have such a war. Now, this is not the first time that a tribe has fought another tribe. We're going to read about the tribe of Benjamin and how all Israel went to war against Benjamin, and that's coming up in another teaching, but that actually happened before this episode. And then the reason is because those last two stories are out of chronological order, and we don't really know exactly where those things go, but this had happened before. And so you can see now that Israel is in a state of hatred, brother against brother, tribe against tribe. Um, this is what sin leads to, folks. It leads to division. And what division this was that was caused by Ephraim's rebellion against Yahweh. What a division this was. Rebellious brethren always cause division. And we read about that in Proverbs 6, that Yahweh hates those who cause division. He hates not just the division, he hates the people who cause that. So Yahweh's people are not only allowed to protect themselves, their families, and their properties, but we are mandated to do so. In Exodus 22:22, which we just read today, if the thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt of bloodshed for him. So those Ephraimites had come to take Jephthah's life and the lives of his entire household. Therefore, his reaction to have war with them is upheld in Torah. Judges 12:5. The Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. When the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, or said to them, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And if he said no, then something happened. And before we talk about what happened, I'm going to interject here, because I want to point out that Ephraim has now turned out to be a lazy, weak, and wicked tribe during this time. It wasn't always so. Ephraim's Joshua had stood with Moses from the time that they were in Egypt, coming out of Egypt, at Mount Sinai, all the way to when he was specially anointed by Yahweh to lead Israel across the Jordan River and to take the land from the Canaanite tribes. But these descendants of those first brave and valiant Ephraimites were now failing in their love for their brethren and Yahweh. They had lost their first love. You know, Jeremiah 2:2 talks about that, and Revelation 2, verses 4-5. And that tribe had already grown fat and kicked. You know, Deuteronomy 32:15. And was leading the other Israelites, the other tribes, to be fat and kick against Yahweh. It had been Joshua, the Ephraimite, who had the tabernacle erected at Shiloh, in the middle of Ephraimite territory where it could be well protected. Now it was largely unattended, and its priesthood had become corrupt. We will find when we study further in Judges and then in 1 Samuel that the Levitical priesthood had become a de facto defunct priesthood, serving only an Israelite faithful remnant and not the entire nation, because of the example of the Ephraimites, in whose territory sat the Ark of the Covenant. The most important issue for the Ephraimites was not the safety and security of their brother Manasseh or any of the other tribes. Rather, it was prestige, power, and authority. Going to Jephthah with evil intent only showed they were selfish and cared only about maintaining the status quo. That the Ephraimites would threaten to burn Jephthah's house with him in it is a sad testimony of the disunited state of Israel during that time under Ephraim's leadership. And we will find now, moving forward in the book of Judges, that Yahweh will begin the removal of the Ephraimite tribe from power. This will begin at the conception of Samson. And we have always been taught, and we've only been taught, that Samson's fight was with the Philistines. That part was true. We have never taught that Yahweh had another intention along with stirring up those Philistines. That Yahweh actually was using that situation to also remove Ephraim from power, to move the tabernacle to Jerusalem, and to set up another faithful Levitical priesthood in Jerusalem. He used the wars with the Philistines to accomplish this. Sometimes what Yahweh does looks like, oh, that's a really bad thing that's going on there. We just have to wait, be faithful, keep doing what He tells us to do, and we will see how it all ends. You know, here at the end of days, looking back on these things, we have all the answers to the questions, folks. Back here in this chapter with Jephthah, he didn't have all the answers to this question. Samson's private war with the Philistines only began the process of removing the Philistines and removing Ephraim from power. But with the Philistines, that process continued after Samson's death. It's going to be exciting when we get to Samson. I'm anxious to get to study Samson. I have one more thing I want to say about Jephthah's war with Ephraim. It is a prophecy of who will greet Yeshua on the Armageddon battlefield. Last week, I pointed out some similarities between Jephthah's war with Ammon, the children of the East. And this week, I want to show you how that it's not going to be just the children of the East, folks. Don't think that those nations are just Gentiles. They are, spiritually. But there is Abraham's, Isaac's, and Jacob's physical seed mixed into those nations. Now, we don't know any way to really tell who's a physical Jacob. You know, if you were in Israel in one of the tribes and you traveled to Jerusalem, you would know people from the other tribes, and you know those tribes had certain physical traits and customs of their own and that kind of thing. You'd kind of know who was Zebulun and who was Benjamite and you know who was Asher. You'd know all that because you know Asher, they bring the best bread, you know. Israel, that is biblical Israel, will not be fighting. That's us, folks. We're not going to be fighting Yeshua at Armageddon. But millions of Jacob's physical descendants will. They will join with the children of the East. And they will come against Yeshua. What a shame for Ephraim, for all of Israel, to have been elevated right up next to Yahweh's throne, above all the nations of the earth, and then they threw it all away like it meant nothing. I went to bed the other night thinking about this and just crying because of what we, our people, did to Yeshua and to Yahweh. And I'm telling you, after doing this study on Jephthah, I'm going to stop calling myself an Ephraimite as a convenient way to tell the Jews over there, you know, who I am. I'm just, when the people of my heritage ask me who I am, I'm going to have to say I'm a biblical Israelite who keeps Yahweh's commandments, and I have the testimony of personally knowing Yeshua. I'm a biblical Israelite because I can't identify with Ephraim. During the battle, many Ephraimites were running across the river into Arab territory east of the Jordan River, you know, to take refuge with the children of the East. And though they had much braggadocio about having wanted to be included in the battle against the children of Ammon, The Ephraimites actually showed themselves to be weak warriors in this battle because they ran away from Jephthah, going across the river. You know that Revelation 7's list of warriors of the 144,000 leaves Ephraim out because Ephraim showed itself to be a tribe of sissies. It was the tribe of Judah where the tabernacle and the priesthood, where that's that territory where everybody's going to end up eventually. The tribe of Judah who carried the bow. In 2 Chronicles 14, 8-13, it talks about Judah carrying the bow. And Zechariah 9:13, I will bend Judah, my bow. And heading first into battle, that's what Judah has been ordained to do, even from when they set up the tribes around the tabernacle. Judah went first into battle. But you know, Jephthah had not asked Judah for help. Judah was not the tribe that was in authority. It was Ephraim. And later on, Ephraim's reputation of running from battle would be written about in the Psalms. In Psalm 78:9, the children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. Ephraim continued running away from battles after Jephthah's battle with the Ammonites. And sadly, this is the reputation Ephraim has to this day. And this is why Ephraim is not included in the list of the 144,000. And now you understand why the doctrine in Judaism says Ephraim will never be able to return to Israel. And because they don't understand what Yeshua did on the cross yet, they're not going to let Ephraim back. But Yeshua will have a remnant from Ephraim, and they will return. You know, the tribe of Judah regards Ephraim as cowards, troublemakers, and weak in their walk with Yahweh. It's no wonder they cringe. And I've had this, you know, let me just get off script again. In January of 2015, when I came on a tour to Israel, I went and I visited Yehuda Glick in his home. Now you'll remember that in the October of 2014, he was shot point blank 4 times by a Palestinian at Temple Mount. And Yehuda Glick lived. He lived. And he and I had become friends on Facebook. I had met him in the States, and, you know, so I had the privilege of going to visit him after one of the Shabbats in his home. And he said to me, and he said it again to me a couple of years later when we were having dinner with a group of us, and he said, what is it that makes you think you're from Ephraim? And I said, well, go to Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 10, and it says there that when we return to keeping the law and so forth, then, you know, Yahweh will bring us back. That's the prophecy. I'm paraphrasing very lightly. And I said, I'm not a Jew, but I do keep the law, and I come to the feasts. Well, I didn't at that time, but I was keeping the feasts wrongly elsewhere in the world. But eventually in 2016, Yahweh told me, when he hit me with a 2x4 practically, you got to go to Jerusalem for this. But I was sitting there talking to him. I said, if we're not Ephraim, if we're not from that house, and returning, I should have said the house of Joseph instead of Ephraim. But he looked at me like, it was a mixture of, boy, I don't like this, and I don't know what to do about it. On his face. Well, I now understand what that was about. And I understand that look with other rabbis who I have talked with. To them, Ephraim is cowards, troublemakers, and weak in their walk with Yahweh. It was an Ephraimite, Jeroboam, who made changes to the law and the feast times and the feast places, which ended with all of the northern tribes following Ephraim and being thrown out of Yahweh's kingdom into exile, where they still are today, along with also the Jews are in exile, but you get my point. And I'm going to tell you that the Ephraimite cowardice has a spiritual connotation that we have to address. And I'm going to tell you about it, but I'm going to suggest that we address this as a people, as a remnant. So here is a good place to address this. The issue of cowardice, which is an Ephraimite trait, has to do with backing away from conflict. This attitude is taught in Christianity as the righteous attitude in which we just, we just forgive without ever hearing a repentance or without ever going to the person to say, hey, you sinned against us, or you sinned against Yahweh, and we saw you do it. We heard you, you say, or whatever. Ephraimites are all bluster. I'm going to go burn your house down. But when it comes to war or actual conflict and just settling a conflict, they don't know how to do it. And so that Ephraimite squishiness, sissiness, has gotten all through Christianity. And people will say, well, I don't want to talk to people about problems because I want to avoid conflict. I got news for you. Luke 17:1 says, Yeshua says, it will be impossible that there will never be conflict between the brethren. It's impossible. In verses 3 and 4, he commands us to rebuke a brother or sister when there is conflict. And by rebuking, we have the wrong connotation of rebuking. What it means is to do what he says in Matthew 18. Go to them, talk to them in secret. Don't go and make war with them like the Ephraimites are doing here with Jephthah. Go and fix the conflict. And if the brother or sister repents, forgive him or her. And this is commanded also in Leviticus 19, which says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, but it adds something to it. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor, and then Yahweh says something else of importance. And not bear sin because of him. That last phrase, not bear sin because of him, has a twofold lesson. First, if we don't confront the sin in the body of Messiah, the congregation of biblical Israel, and we leave the entire body in their sin, the congregation, we open the congregation to foul corruption. We've been reading it in the book of Judges. If we don't come to people and try to correct things, the corruption is going to get worse. And second, the connotation there also says that we bear the sin of our brother or sister that we refuse to deal with. In other words, any sin that we see that we can open up our Torah, I'm not talking about, you irritated me and now you have to repent. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a sin you can open the Torah and there is Thou shalt not do that. But you did that, my brother or my sister. If we don't do that, that sin that we won't deal with in others will boomerang back on us. We will bear the sin because of the one we won't confront. So Yeshua showed us how to deal with conflict in Matthew 5:23 and 24, and in Matthew 18, verses 15 through 19. We must love each other enough to help each other know when we have sinned against Yahweh or ourselves. If you try and the person won't listen, the sin will not be yours. But if you don't try, the sin becomes yours. It is credited to you, as Leviticus 19:17 says, "You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him, because you have rebuked him or you have gone to work out what you know the sin is in their life." And by the way, it's an act of love for us to do this with each other. There's an old axiom. It says, the eye cannot see itself. I need you to tell me what's going on in my life, but don't come and tell me, you don't like the look on my face or the tone of my voice. There's no sin in the Torah that says that, when you see Kimberly and she has a look on her face or a tone in her voice. No, it's a Torah sin. It's one that affects the entire congregation. It affects Yahweh and it affects our brethren. So this attitude of running from the battle, even small battles like what I was just talking about in our congregations, in our fellowships, comes straight out of the corruption and wickedness of Ephraim, who ran from battles. This attitude permeates all of the northern house of Israel, which is mostly trapped in Christianity. The house of Judah appears not to have absorbed this trait. The Jews, they just don't have a problem telling you what's on their mind. I've spent the last 10 years now being around Jews. I can I can tell you, they will tell you. Anyway, Jephthah created a way to detect Ephraimites from among the Israelites crossing eastward over the Jordan River. Now, why was there Israelites crossing the Jordan River? Because there was trade going on between the Israelites on the west side of the river and the 3 tribes of Israel on the east side, and also maybe trade between the various tribes of the children of the east, and probably this might also have been going on, that some Israelites were traveling to the children of the east to worship their gods. But not all of them were cowardly Ephraimites, you see, crossing that river. Judges 12:6 tells us how Jephthah determined who was an Ephraimite and who was not. It says, "Then they said to him, 'Now say Shibboleth.' And he said, 'Sibolet,' for he couldn't manage to pronounce it right. Then they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of Ephraim fell. 42,000 of Ephraim fell in that battle with Jephthah. Now, during World War II, the Germans did the same thing. They sometimes identified Russian Jews by the way they pronounced the word for corn, kukuruza. The Jews had a distinctive Russian pronunciation which revealed their Russian ethnicity, so it was the same, for these men of Ephraim, that their accent did them in. Now, the words Shibboleth, Strong's H7641, and Sibolet, Strong's H5451, mean either flowing stream or ear of corn. Boy, It's like the difference between the word humam and humam. In Arabic, one means bathroom and the other means bird. So I went into a store one time and I said, Ayn dak humam, and they looked at me strange, and I said, bathroom, water closet, toilet. I should have said, Ayn dak humam, which meant bathroom and not bird. Anyway, little funny story in there. The Ephraimites were betrayed by their own unique dialect, which tells us how little time they spent with the brethren at Shiloh. You know, if you spend time with a bunch of your brethren, you can begin to hear each other's dialect, and you have you know, conversation, and you don't develop so much of your own style when you spend time with the brethren as you do when you spend time all by your little self. Judges 12:7. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in the cities of Gilead. So the time which Yahweh gave to mankind to destroy the earth is 6,000 years. Jephthah's 6 years judging Israel reflects the principle of a year for a day. And this, folks, is the final prophecy of Jephthah. Let's now learn about the next three judges of Israel. Judges 12:8. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters he sent outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from outside his clan for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried in Ajalon, in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 sons' sons who rode on 70 donkey colts. He judged Israel 8 years. Abdon, the son of Hillel the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon, in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. Now, these next three judges after Jephthah were apparently remarkably unremarkable because, except they were wealthy, but, Samuel didn't say much of anything about them. Abdon's sons and his grandsons each had his own Ferrari donkey. He was wealthy. This in itself is actually indicative that it was the wealthy who now are becoming the judges, a point Samuel was likely trying to make. In the beginning, it was the righteous and the valiant, right? Now, it's all about who has the most money running for the office of national judge of Israel. And, Abdon, he was apparently, he was something to the Ephraimites, and they looked at his 70 offspring and their Ferrari donkeys, and they were impressed with that, And so this brings us to some necessary information for the study of the rest of the book of Judges. When I was researching the number of years that the judges actually judged Israel, I discovered that it was anywhere from, some say 180 years to some say 410 years. Well, my own addition, going through the book of Judges, this judge, judged for this many years, and this judged, and add them up, I came up with 410 years as well. So no one knows exactly how many years was the time of the judges. Some of the timelines trying to prove the length of years were amazingly detailed, and one of them showed that it was exactly 336 years if you overlap the lives of several judges. I suppose This can all change if you take in the time that the tabernacle stood at Shiloh, starting in Joshua, which I did not, because we don't know how long it stood in Joshua before he died, or stood in Shiloh before Joshua died. But this website said 336 years if you overlap the lives of several judges. But I think there's a problem with that. Some of the overlapping judges actually have a succession, like the last three judges here in chapter, where two of them has the word after. After he died, the next one came. It's, when he died. It says after he died. Some scholars claim that these last three judges after Jephthah overlapped, which cannot be, because upon the death of the first two, Ibzan and Elon, we read, after him came the next one. So there is no after him when Abdon died. And there may be a reason for this, and I'll tell you that in a minute. Ehud, when he killed King Eglon, it says after he died, in Judges 3:31, Shamgar came. His successor was Shamgar. Scripture does not say anyone came after Shamgar, but the next chapter immediately launches into the account of Deborah. Now, Scripture does not say Deborah came after Shamgar, and so it is possible then that Deborah and Shamgar's judgeships overlapped, with Shamgar dying before Deborah. And after her came Gideon, but there is no after Deborah came Gideon announcement when Gideon arose. It is also possible then that Deborah's judgeship overlapped with Gideon somewhat. The judge after Gideon died, after he died in Judges 8:32 and 33, was listed as his own son Abimelech, who had an after announcement in Judges 10:1. The next judge was Tola, the son of Puah, from Issachar. So the timeline I mentioned earlier that shows 336 years does not match with the 369 years that the tabernacle stood in Shiloh. And this is a generally accepted time frame for the tabernacle at Shiloh, which I don't want to go into all of that timeline. Solomon said the temple was built 480 years after the Exodus from Egypt in 1 Kings 6:1. So I just started from there. So I went from his 480 years, and I subtracted 369 years of the tabernacle at Shiloh, and I arrived at 111 years. Now we know Saul reigned for 40 years, and David reigned for 40 years, which leaves 31 years to be accounted for, which I believe is the life of Samson. The possible overlapping judges indicates there was a split in the kingdom early on, around the time of Deborah even, because Yahweh said the people were to choose a judge. 1. Deuteronomy 17:9. You shall come to the priests who are Levites and to the judge who shall be in those days. You shall inquire, and they shall give you the verdict. So Yahweh's instruction was to have one judge at a time. But, Israel began to abandon Yahweh's law even while Joshua was alive. And if, you had one tribe that didn't trust another tribe, well, they're not going to accept a judge now from that tribe. You see how that would happen? It was Joshua's righteousness which restrained most of Israel from serving other gods until after he died. But after that, Israel went through repeated cycles of other god worship, crying out to Yahweh for their oppression at the hands of their enemies, and then repenting and then being delivered and starting it all over again. But now we're going to go back to Abdon because he may have overlapped with Jephthah, or not with Jephthah rather. He may have overlapped with Samson. Furthermore, it is also probable that the lives of Samson, the high priest Eli, and Samuel overlapped. One scholar believes Abdon, Samson, and Samuel were contemporaries, each judging in different parts of Israel. Abdon in the northern tribes, Samson in the tribe of Dan while clobbering the Philistines, and Samuel in Judah and Benjamin areas of Israel. Now, no one brings forth scripture for this conjecture. The only parallels and scholarly opinions are brought forth so far that I've seen for the timeline, but we do know that Samuel's sons later would be judges simultaneously with Samuel in their circuits throughout Israel, and I can see that it is possible for Samson and Samuel to have had overlapping judgeships during the final years of the priest Eli, especially if Samuel was born toward the end of Samson's 20 years of judging. The reason I agree with this is because Samson so irritated the Philistines when he killed so many of them at their great big celebration that it may have been what sparked them to attack Israel later on, 21 miles west of Shiloh. That was Samson's final battle. And so they might have just said, we've had enough of this. We're just gonna go and put down any more unrest, right? We read about them coming to that area, Aphek and Ebenezer, which is about 21 miles west of Shiloh, in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 1. The scriptures don't tell us why the Philistines attacked, only that they did. So it makes sense then that little 10-year-old Samuel, and the scriptures don't tell us anything except that he was still a child, but he was still old enough to serve Eli in the tabernacle in 1 Samuel 3:1. So Samuel knew or understood about the aftermath of Samson's victory over the Philistines at their great big celebration, and he would have then understood why the Philistines showed up just west of Shiloh. Thus, it is possible, even probable, that Samson and Samuel did overlap in their lives. And that brings us to the next study, which has to do with Samson, under whom Yahweh said Israel would begin to be delivered from the Philistines. Unlike the previous judges who won decisive battles that delivered all Israel from oppression, we will now witness a shift in how Yahweh handles the enemy's oppression of his people. He's not going to just wholesale deliver them out of their trouble. He will now use a long and drawn-out process, which went from this time, probably from the last 20 years that the tabernacle stood at Shiloh, which is also the last 20 years of Samson's life when he was judging Israel. So it was 411 years from 1015 BC when scholars say that 1 Samuel happened, thus 411 years plus 20 years of Samson and the tabernacle at Shiloh brings us to 431 years until Yahweh actually completed the destruction of the Philistines in 604 BC, when the Babylonians attacked Israel and Jerusalem, and they went down there and they just wiped out the Philistines. There's nothing left of the Philistines. Believe me, I've looked in the genetic record. Archaeologists think they find pieces of genetic material, but the Babylonians just did in the Philistines. And I'll share with you Why that's so? That's because the Philistines were Egyptian. Now I'm going to tell you next week where I get that, and it's in the scriptures. They're not from Greece. And I'll go into all of that next week. It'll be in the beginning of the study. As for Abdon, back to Abdon, the judge who some say overlapped with Samson and Samuel. Well, again, his most notable thing was that he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkey colts and judged Israel for 8 years. And that ends his honorable mention by Samuel. The book of Judges has two stories that are not chronological, and they appear in chapters 17 through 21. They come at the end of the book with the account of Micah, who was an idolater, and his personal Levite, whom he ordained as his own personal household priest, and the account of another Levite whose concubine was killed by the Benjamites. Did these chapters get out of place over the millennia by the hands of men handling them, or did Samuel write the book this way? We don't know. What is apparent, though, is that Samuel wanted to illustrate the depths of depravity of the Aaronic and Levitical priesthoods and how they had fallen. Samuel also made sure his audience understood how the Ephraimites fell from their status as lead tribe. It is no wonder the people fell so far. While it is true Yahweh expects the people to keep the leadership in line as much as the leadership is supposed to keep the people in line, it did not happen that way in either direction. In biblical Israel, the Israel which Yeshua died to restore, that Israel, everyone is responsible for and accountable to everyone else, no matter where the person is in the national hierarchy, let me pronounce that correctly. For no one is above any other except in the offices in which they serve. We need to remember this now, before the kingdom comes. The people of Yahweh need to start rebuking the failing leadership in the body of Messiah. And they need to start walking away from those failed leaderships. The people need to know doctrine as well as the leaders. If all the people were doing what Paul said in Philippians 2:12 and 13, so then, my beloved, even as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. If we were doing that, we would not have the splintering of the body, the quarreling, the corruption, everybody doing what is right in his or her own eyes. We would all be doing what Yahweh said, and we would know what he meant when he said it. But alas, that takes killing the flesh, and the flesh just doesn't want to die to Yahweh's Spirit. And that ends the teaching.